Replacing Donovan Smith doesn't mean the Buccaneers have to go offensive tackle in the first round. That and more coming up on this legal tampering primer episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bucs Nation? Welcome to the Locked On Bucs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube and the 10 Tampa Bay Plus app on your Roku or your Amazon Fire Stick. And we thank you for making us your first listen or your first view of the day. I am David Harrison, staff writer for BucsGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation. My co-host James Yarko, the deputy editor of SBNation.com, part of or BucsNation.com, part of SB Nation, not here on this episode, but you can still find him on Twitter at JYarko_Bucs. I'm at DHarrison82, and the show is at Locked On Bucs. This episode of Locked On Bucs is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the National Football League. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. A bigger target than you probably expect from me for the defensive free agent list that the Buccaneers could be looking at. And finally, I'm going to have the quarterback conversation that I've been avoiding. But first, we go out and search for a Donovan Smith replacement, starting with a veteran placeholder that allows you, if you're the Buccaneers, to keep yourself from reaching for an offensive tackle in the first round of the upcoming NFL draft. So to recap real quick, Donovan Smith has been released, of course. James Yarko and Evan Klosky of 10 Tampa Bay had a great reaction episode that dropped yesterday. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do so after you watch this episode or listen to this episode. But in doing so, the Buccaneers save a total of $9.95 million in cap space after dead cap penalties and all that. So in my opinion, you're probably not going over that amount, really trying not to even get close to that amount in the new guy that you bring in to play left tackle, which makes the NFL draft a very attractive spot to find that replacement. And it also takes guys like, say, Orlando Brown Jr., the left tackle from Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs, who's about to be a free agent, off the board. But it does leave some other guys, and some of these other guys do offer you the opportunity to potentially not have to reach for an offensive tackle. And again, the key word there is reach. I'm not saying that either of these signings would just completely take tackle off the board for the Buccaneers, but the idea is just to give yourself maximum flexibility. I think that's what every head coach, what every GM wants heading into the NFL draft, is the flexibility to take the player you want to have, not take a player that you have to have, right? So while you can't get Orlando Brown Jr., one guy of an older veteran that you could target is offensive tackle Kelvin Beachum. Beachum most recently played for the Arizona Cardinals. He turns 34 in June, has played in Pittsburgh, has played in Jacksonville, played for the Jets, and then again, most recently played for the Cardinals. Kind of made headlines Thursday morning because he mentioned that quarterback Kyler Murray needs to grow up a little bit. I don't think that's really breaking news, but anytime someone says anything relatively negative about a starting quarterback in the NFL, that's going to make headlines. So there we are. There he is. But Beachum, again, a little bit older. But look, Donovan Smith, for all of his ups and downs, the biggest thing that he brought to the Buccaneers, right, was consistency. You knew every Sunday, whether you liked it or not, that Donovan Smith was going to be the left tackle of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Well, Beachum has played 92% or more of his team's offensive snaps every year since 2016, regarded as a very solid leader in every locker room that he's been in, specifically the Arizona Cardinals locker room, which he just left. And look, Beachum is actually NFL.com's number 55 overall free agent, which is interesting because of how old he is, obviously, but also because Donovan Smith is number 62. So in theory, you could actually, if the NFL.com rankings are any indication, could actually upgrade at left tackle and save some money doing it. Beachum is projected, according to SpotTrack, to cost less than $4 million per year on a new deal. I don't know, man. In his 30s, I think most likely you're looking at a 1-year deal, right? But if I'm the Buccaneers, maybe you toss him a 2 or 3 year deal even, and you get him to sign for maybe less money up front guaranteed, more money on the back end for staying healthy, doing things like that. You save a little bit of cash, but you give Kelvin Beachum a little bit more security in the tail end of his contract or his tail end of his career that he's probably interested in. I think it's a good move. I think it's a move that the Buccaneers should certainly look at. And again, doesn't necessarily take you off of the market of, say, a Paris Johnson. If Paris Johnson makes it to number 19, or someone like that, then certainly you could look at a player like that in the first round anyway. But, if that guy needs a little bit of time to get going, then maybe Beachum is there to step in. Or at worst case scenario, you've got a veteran insurance policy and a leader in the locker room, in the meeting room, to help your young guy get ready. So Kelvin Beachum, a free agent that I think that the Buccaneers should talk to as legal tampering gets underway Monday at noon Eastern time. Also, Andrew Wylie. So this is a right tackle mostly. Can play across the line. He's played guard. He's played left tackle. He's played right tackle. Going to be 29 in August, so a little bit younger than Beachum. 5 years in the National Football League so far. This is a Kansas City Chiefs product. Spot Track has him coming in at a little over $4 million. So I think you're going to pay a little bit more for Andrew Wylie, mainly probably because he's coming off that Super Bowl experience. And he's also a little bit younger. But that, if you want to, opens the door to potentially move Tristan Wirfs from the right to the left. I know some Bucs fans don't like that idea. At the end of the day, I'm going to leave that up to Tristan, and I'm going to leave that up to his offensive line coach. If they believe that they can make it happen, I'm not going to get in the way, and nor could I get. Have you seen Tristan Wirfs? There's no way I can get in the way of Tristan Wirfs trying to do that anyway. But look, that creates automatic competition. You got Luke Gedeke coming into his second year. If they do indeed move him back to his organic right tackle position, and then you bring in Andrew Wylie to compete it out, and then maybe you go, third, fourth, fifth round somewhere in there. You grab another young right tackle to come in, and you make it a 3-man contest, and may the best guy win. So that gives you some flexibility. It opens up some things. It doesn't force you. Either of those signings don't force you into signing a guy that maybe is a little too early or earlier than you would be more comfortable with. Again, legal tampering begins Monday at noon. So we'll keep an eye out on that. You guys keep an eye out on that as well. And we're going to look at players that are going to potentially fill this hole, at least to a certain degree, ahead of the NFL draft. But here on today's episode, we're also going to look at some other players that could be targeted by the Bucs in legal tampering to fill positions outside of the left tackle position. So there's some other positions that could be filled here, and we're going to do that next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Bucs is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers, you get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So if you want to go aggressive on a parlay, on a money line, on whatever you want, against the spread, on the spread, however you want to do this, if it doesn't work out, you get that money back in the form of bonus bets that you can then try to use to recoup your real money bank. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and even threes drained. I write for Inside the Wizards, a part of Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, covering the Washington Wizards. And prior to their loss Wednesday night against the Atlanta Hawks, I wrote a piece about betting on that game. And I said to take the Wizards plus the 3 points. We hit on that. So if you took that advice, you also hit on that. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay, which we did in Inside the Wizards, and we did not hit on that one. You can't win all of them, right? So don't miss a chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks again, Bucs Nation, for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen or your first view of the day. Continuing our search in search of potential free agent targets the Buccaneers could speak to during the legal tampering period, and of course the opening of NFL free agency to maintain maximum NFL draft flexibility. Again, none of these signings necessarily will just preclude the Buccaneers from taking a draft pick or taking a prospect in the first, second, third, seventh rounds, what have you. Just looking for guys who you could look at and say, okay, this guy could feasibly fill a role that we need. So if we don't get that in the NFL draft, we're not just completely sunk. You know what I mean? We'll be okay. We don't have to reach for a guy. So obviously with the Buccaneers salary cap situation, look, the salary cap is flexible. It's manageable. The Buccaneers have a lot of room. They could create like $40-50 million in salary cap space if they really need to, just by simply adjusting some contracts and turning some roster bonuses or turning some salary into roster bonuses. Things like that. But ideally for this exercise, we're not just going to go crazy. I'm not just going to sit here and say like, boom, Orlando Brown Jr. Don't worry about the cap, guys. We'll sign Orlando Brown Jr. Boom, let's sign. I don't even know who the next guy. We'll go get DeAndre Hopkins. Don't worry about the salary cap. we're going to be a little bit realistic here. So basically, we're going to go thrift shopping, right? We're going to pop some tags. Here's the targets that we're talking about. And we're going to start at quarterback because you already know that I'm a fan of bringing in Drew Lock, right? I think the Buccaneers should certainly bring him in. I would like day one of like Monday at noon is legal tampering. Monday at 12:30, I want to hear that Drew Lock and the Buccaneers have struck a deal. He's going to come in and compete with Kyle Trask for that starting quarterback position. But it's time that I go a different way. James Yarko, my good buddy, my co-host here on Locked on Bucs, has talked about him. I've kind of just let James talk about him. I think I've made my feelings known, but I haven't really gone in depth about it. Let's talk about Baker Mayfield. So James is an advocate for bringing in Baker Mayfield. You're probably talking a multi-year deal, and he thinks that Baker Mayfield could probably beat Kyle Trask to be the starting quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that part of it, but here's what I want to talk about, right? So first, as we dive into Baker Mayfield, SpotTrack says that Mayfield should be signable for around $6 million per year on average, which is very affordable in the quarterback market. I don't believe it's going to take that. I think he's going to want at least $8 million. And I think there are enough people that maybe will see the potential in the youth, unfortunately, to draw that number up. I think if you have an $8 million quarterback, you have a $1 million quarterback, Kyle Trask, you have a little bit more pressure to start that $8 million guy. I don't know how much of a competition you really keep or create by bringing in Mayfield. Now, if you don't want Kyle Trask to even have a competition or a competitive opportunity to beat Baker Mayfield, you're okay with that, right? But if you want that competition, which I would like to see that competition, if you're not going to go all in on trading up for Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, I would like to see a legitimate competition. And I don't know, I just think if you're spending $7 or $8 million more on a guy than his competition, quote unquote, I don't know that you really have the affordability to make that a competition. So surprisingly enough, Mayfield actually doesn't have the worst quarterback record. I know wins and losses aren't quarterback stats, but we always tie those to the quarterback anyway. 31-38 as a starting quarterback in the NFL, which I thought was better than you would expect given how far he's fallen. I mean, first number one overall pick, savior of Cleveland, took them to the playoffs the first time in however many years, and then he's unceremoniously bounced to Carolina, leaves Carolina mid-season, goes to the Los Angeles Rams, has a great debut, but then pretty much nothing after that. Here's my biggest thing about it's not so much the wins and losses, but look, Cleveland had weapons, right? And Cleveland had offensive linemen. Like Cleveland had opportunities and receivers. I mean, Odell Beckham was there, Jarvis Landry was there, David Njoku was supposed to be a pretty good guy. He's done some good things. Nick Chubb, best running back in the NFL, at least one of the best, if not the best. I mean, there have been weapons there for Baker Mayfield. And maybe they haven't had the best offensive line in front of them, but they haven't had the worst offensive line in front of them either. Yet they only have one double-digit win in Cleveland while Baker is there. He's never thrown for 30 touchdowns and double-digit interceptions, and I think 3 of his first 5 seasons. And honestly, the Rams, he went 1-3. Like everybody talks about the great Thursday Night Football debut, and don't get me wrong, it was impressive. I watched it. I was like, oh man, I can't believe this guy's doing this with zero knowledge of the playbook. But he went 1-3. And Matt Stafford wasn't exactly doing all that great before that, and they lost Odell Beckham Jr. as well. And the running game was kind of sparse, and I get all that. But at the end of the day, this isn't a quarterback who's really done a whole lot at 3 different opportunities: the Cleveland Browns, Carolina Panthers, and the Los Angeles Rams. And make no mistake about it, like he went to the Panthers. The intent was him to be the starter over Sam Darnold, and it still didn't work out, and they let him walk out the door pretty much freely. So if 3, and the Rams now don't seem to really be making a push to keep him. So if 3 NFL franchises have already moved on from this guy, why would you want the Buccaneers? Why I wouldn't want the Buccaneers to be the 4th to give him an opportunity to come in. If he's just coming in to be a backup, okay, fine. But if you're coming in to be a backup, you're making less than the starter. And Kyle Trask is not making $6 to $8 million a year. So again, I'm not signing Baker Mayfield. Could the Bucs target Mayfield? Absolutely. They certainly could. And if you like him, hey, look, I get why you might like him. His edginess, his attitude, it's attractive. Should they? Clearly, in my opinion, they should not. James disagrees. That's okay. That's why we both have a voice, and that's why we both host this show. Another free agent offensive player that's interesting to me is running back David Montgomery. Currently, SpotTrack has him scheduled to make $7.2 million per year, so I don't think that's a first wave NFL free agency option. But if he makes it past the first wave, maybe you get him cheaper. Maybe he becomes a name that we discuss. So kind of keep an eye out on him as we work through this process. But the next offensive player that I do want to talk about is Minnesota Vikings tight end Irv Smith. And I got to give a shout out to my guy, Mike Kewok of BucsNation.com. He actually brought this up in a conversation we were having in a Twitter DM, brought up Irv Smith. And the more I think about it, the more that I like it. Estimated to make $10 million per year. Again, We're not going to go crazy on the whole salary cap is amenable or manageable and flexible, but the salary cap is manageable and flexible. So don't worry about the upfront necessary numbers like that. $10 million per year doesn't have to be $10 million against the cap this year. If you pick up what I'm putting down. Look, Irv Smith will turn 25 during this upcoming preseason. He's got 3 NFL years under his belt at the age of 20, will be the age of 26. His best season came in 2020 when he had 365 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns. Keeps the Buccaneers, in my opinion, from having to target a tight end early so that they can then, again, the idea is flexibility, fill in other areas of need to have more kind of volatile roster situations. Cade Otton, I like Cade Otton. I think he's got number 1 tight end potential. I don't think he's there yet. We've kind of talked about this already, right? So if you take Irv Smith, would you take Irv Smith this year? Or would you take Irv Smith or Dalton Kincaid? Irv Smith or Michael Mayer? Irv Smith or, any of these other guys? Darnell Washington, they're all slipping my mind now for some reason. Luke Musgrave. Like, who would you rather have? And I think and again, you're just talking year 1. You're not talking career. You're talking year 1. If you're the Buccaneers, you can make the case that Irv Smith is probably your 3rd or 4th tight end. If you put him in that list of guys, he's probably the 3rd or 4th tight end, I think. Overall, I do think there's a couple of guys. Dalton Kincaid is my top tight end. I think he could probably do better for you even this year. And then obviously moving forward, there's that advantage. But if you keep him and you make him kind of your, however you want to call it, 1 Alpha, 1 Bravo, like co-starters, depending on the package, however you want to word it, it gives you the opportunity. You push Cade Otton by putting another guy in the room, but you also secure your tight end group a little bit there with Irv Smith. So I'm a big fan of that. Again, lets you have some flexibility in the NFL draft to address other areas. One of those areas, the safety position. So a safety target is coming up next, and another defensive free agent the Bucs could talk to when legal tampering begins on Monday that you may not have expected to come out of this conversation, but it's going to happen, and that's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Legal tampering begins on Monday in the National Football League at noon Eastern time before the new league year begins on March 15th. And that at 4 p.m. Eastern, March 15th is when deals can go final. So we're looking at some legal tampering targets. Again, not the sexiest names in the world necessarily, because we do think that the Buccaneers are going to be a little thrifty, try to get the salary cap to settle a little bit. We're going to keep with that theme here, looking at 2 defensive guys for one of them. With the second guy, I'm going to get a little rich here on this conversation. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. But first, we're going to start off with the safety position. Right now, you have Antoine Winfield Jr., and that's about it. No shade to some of these other guys, but as far as starting caliber safeties, you don't have a whole lot. Mike Edwards is scheduled to be a free agent. We could have news as early as Monday afternoon, early Monday evening, that he struck a deal with somebody else and he'll be leaving Tampa. Hopefully he comes back. Hopefully they can make these numbers work. But if he leaves, the Buccaneers absolutely have to go safety in the NFL draft, right? But do you need to go safety in round 1? Well, that all is going to depend on what happens in free agency. And a guy that you can bring in to help you from having to reach in round 1, right, per se, for a safety potentially, is Green Bay Packers safety Adrian Amos. Adrian Amos turns 30 in April. He's had 8 years in the National Football League currently between the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, and has started every game since 2018. Some of those are for the Bears, some of those are for the Green Bay Packers. We talk about the consistency and availability. He has started every game for his team, whether it be Chicago, whether it be in Green Bay, since 2018. He's versatile enough to play both strong and free safety, getting a little bit older, so maybe the wheels aren't what they used to be. Plus, you have Antoine Winfield Jr., so you don't need him to be that free safety. But we also know that Antoine Winfield Jr. can drop into the box. So really, if you put him and Amos back there together, you've got 2 safeties. Both have some coverage ability. Both have some box ability. So you see the offense uses motion, try to identify your scheme. As long as you don't have to move your corners, if you have your safeties out there, simply communicate, change an assignment, whatever you have to do. You could stay in that man or zone coverage and not actually tip your hand to the other side of the field. So to me, Adrian Amos, Kelvin Beachum, like the 2 out of this list that are most likely to happen, I think these are the 2 guys. Again, solid, not great player that can help you replace Mike Edwards, let you go safety, maybe in the later rounds, maybe in the middle rounds. Sidney Brown out of Illinois is obviously a guy that James would love to see come in, but as Sidney Brown comes in, maybe he's not ready to take that full starting role right away. You have a veteran, again, to help teach. You also have a veteran to help out there on the field who has some reliability and some history of being reliable to actually be on the playing field. So Again, Adrian Amos is a safety that you're going to be able to get at a pretty affordable number at this point in juncture of his career, and we see it every year, man. Safeties, even some of the top safeties that are supposedly available. And Tyrann Mathieu, when did he sign with the Saints? It was quite a while into the process. So Adrian Amos is a guy that maybe not legal tampering. Maybe you don't see it, but maybe the Buccaneers, if they lose Mike Edwards, decide to go strong after and just get it done. But even if you don't see him come off during the NFL legal tampering period or the early stages of free agency, Adrian Amos certainly a guy that I could see fitting with the Buccaneers and what their current roster calls for. So now it's time for my big target, my big defensive lineman target, David Onyemata from the New Orleans Saints. And James is going to remember this name, and some of you are going to remember this name because when it was looking like he might become a free agent previous to his previous deal, his most recent deal with the New Orleans Saints, I was all about bringing David Onyemata into the fold in Tampa. He is now going to be a free agent. Well, he's actually going to be a free agent this time. I'm still all about, he's a little bit older, right? He is going to turn 31 in November, and he is expected by Spot Track to get around $10 million per year in salary. It's a lot. It's not a lot, but it's a lot when you're talking about the salary cap situation the Buccaneers are in. But again, with the salary cap being as flexible as it is, you will be able to get players who, it's not really a big deal to accept a restructuring of their deal anyway. They don't lose any money, but you will be able to get guys who agree to do so to bring in a player, I think, like David Onyemata. When you look at that defensive line, you look at how the impact it has on the linebacker group. Again, we've said it. Todd Bowles has admitted it. Like, the fact that Vita Vea was the team leader in sacks last year is not a good thing. Like, good for Vita. We want to see that production every year if we can, but that's not good for the team because this scheme is not designed to free up your defensive tackle, your nose tackle, to be your sack getter. He's supposed to be a block eater, a run stuffer, and then the sacks come from your off-ball linebackers, your edge players. David Onyemata is a guy who come in, can fill that role. Then Dominican Sue filled that. Akeem Hicks tried to fill last year. And I think he would be a better fit for what they have, than Akeem Hicks and then what they have currently on the roster. But also, he is getting a little bit older, so you use him as a little bit of a rotational piece. You bring in Logan Hall from time to then. If you come into an even front up front, you move David Onyemata inside. You put Logan Hall there on the outside. Again, still, maybe draft a 4th, 5th round D lineman to come and join the fray and all that stuff. But in the initial aspect of it, the initial season, after the acquisition, David Onyemata makes your defensive line better. He makes Vita Vea better. And I think he makes the pass rushers behind him and around him better. 5-6 last season for the New Orleans Saints. Again, just a consistent player. Again, could rotate well with Logan Hall as he develops. Is it too rich for the Buccaneers' blood? I feel like it probably is. But this was my opportunity to throw his name out there, and I decided I'm going to take it. So in my eyes, look, David Onyemata is a day one starter. You rotate him, you bring in a young guy, or you already have a young guy if you think that Logan Hall is going to replace him. Again, I think Logan Hall is more of a Will Golson replacement. So I'd like to see the Buccaneers go after a different type, maybe a Brian Bresee, bring him in. He's got some injury history, so maybe you bring him in slowly into the fold, mix him in there with David Onyemata, and then maybe eventually next year Brian Bresee becomes kind of the full-time guy if he can stay healthy. So that kind of a scenario. I'm for it, and I think that David Oyemata, if you are going to go on the richer end, if you're the Buccaneers in free agency and legal tampering on Monday, that's the kind of guy that you want to target to make that move. So let me know what you think about that move. Let me know what you think about all the other moves. If you have your own moves, own guys that you think the Buccaneers should target in free agency and legal tampering, drop them in the YouTube comments. Hit me up on Twitter as well. Thank you in the meantime for making Locked On Bucs podcast first listener and first view of the day. For your second listener view, check out Locked On NFL Draft. Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL draft prospects with deep dives into sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL franchise. Find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I will be back tomorrow with an NFL draft episode. We're not doing mock drafts, right? It's not mock draft Monday yet, but we are going to have a draft-centric episode, get some deeper thoughts into what happened in scouting combine, who can fill some of these needs the Buccaneers have because they've got a good amount of them. If you've got reactions to today's topic or anything additional that you want to talk about, any other subjects, comments, or your own mock drafts, shoot them into the email inbox at lockedonbucs@gmail.com or hit the Locked On Bucs DM on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, or you can find me at DHarrison82. For James Jarko, I'm David Harrison. Till we speak again, make sure you're checking out everything being written over at BucsNation.com and at BucsGameDay.com. And again, That Twitter handle is dharrison82 or _Bucs or Locked On Bucs. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, fire those cannons, and thank you for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs.